All right, so let's begin. First step towards financial planning is to buy the right kind of insurance, be it life or health. But talking about health insurance policies specifically, along with looking at the coverage inclusions, your coverage amount, and the features which are to be offered by insurance company as per their policy, one also has to look and in fact focus on the waiting period in case of any existing health condition. So on today's show, we will analyze and help you understand the reason behind the waiting period and how important it is for you to disclose any pre-existing health condition. For this, I have Harsh Roongta with me today. Harsh, good evening and welcome to the show. All right, so let's break this down. We are talking about health insurance policies and all those kind of policies where usually we see a waiting period. Why is there a waiting period for most of the pre-existing health conditions?
The waiting period is a part of disclosures, right? In terms of, as they say, an insurance is a contract of utmost good faith, and therefore you are supposed to disclose everything, even whether you are asked about it or not. Now, based on your current health, the way insurance works is that the risk is spread over many people, and the premium is collected into a pool, and only some of the people will suffer from the risk, and they will be paid from the pool, and there will be some amount left as a profit for the insurance company. That is the insurance model in it's in its utterly simple shape. Now the point is that somebody is at a higher risk, because if he is already suffering from a disease, then the chances that he will be hospitalized and therefore there will be a claim increases, and therefore logically he ought to have paid a higher premium, or he ought to have been denied that insurance policy depending on what that illness is. Now sometimes and it takes time for the hospitalization to happen. After that, the disease may be there, but it manifests itself much later. So that is the reason there is normally a waiting period. The maximum waiting period that has been prescribed by IRDA is 4 years, although companies can have lower periods. But I think the clear thing is that this applies to your pre-disclosed pre-existing conditions. If you have not disclosed, then you have a chance that your claim might be completely denied, totally denied.
The discussion, yeah. So the claim getting rejected, I think we'll come to this later on. But then Amjad has also joined us. Amjad, good evening and welcome to the show. So Amjad, usually there is a confusion between waiting period and exclusions. Harsh explained it very well as to people who already have a pre-existing health condition are at a higher risk, and which is why the companies would want to introduce or give them a waiting period for certain years. That also varies depending on what kind of insurance policy you're buying and what's the severity of whatever health condition you're going through. But then I also want you to highlight a common distinguishing point between exclusions and waiting period, because a lot of people do not understand the terminology or the criteria of exclusions in a health insurance policy.
Okay, so understanding waiting periods, I think waiting periods is one important thing where the insurance companies puts on those clauses in a policy to ensure that there are basically two-pronged approach with the insurance company has. One is to ensure that they are able to segregate risk. So basically ensure that the risk is better when they underwrite it, and that's where the waiting period plays a role. And secondly, to ensure that depending on various criteria a person is taking a policy, right? A health insurance policy could be taken by a 25 years old or a 40 years old. So these are different states of life in individuals' lives. So to ensure all those things, waiting periods are there. So under a waiting period, you'll have 3 or 4 different kinds of waiting period, like a pre-existing waiting period. You will have a policy waiting period. You have disease-wise waiting period. Whereas the exclusions list is a list which will not be covered under the policy. So whenever you read the exclusions list, it will be categorically defined 1, 2, 3 diseases or ailments which will never be covered under a policy. So that is something which, no matter what the time of the policy, no matter how much years have matured under a policy, an exclusion will always be an exclusion.
All right, Harsh, now let's talk about the kind of health conditions which normally would come under a waiting period. Does this differ from policy to policy or insurance company to insurance company?
So I think pre-existing condition has now been defined by IRDA, and it has to be a common definition. Uh, I mean, I don't often remember, but essentially what it means is that if you have taken for any ailment or disease, if you have taken some consultation from a medical professional over the past, I think 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure of the exact period, then you ought to disclose that, and that would be counted as a pre-existing disease. And I think it's a very, very specific thing that is provided. Then, there would be other things such as, let's say, knee replacement or hip replacement, or those kind of things, or there are the things like hysterectomy and those kind of things. I think their typically waiting periods are about 2 years, but it could vary from policy to policy. That's not defined. Neither is the waiting period on a pre-existing condition necessarily needs to be there. Maximum it can be 4, minimum it can be 0. It depends on the insurance company.
Amjad, is there any way we can skip the waiting period? I mean, what would be those criteria where an insurance company would be willing to skip the waiting period? Can we pay more premium and just skip this entire process of few years?
So nowadays, what we see is in the last 12, 18 months, there are a few companies in the Indian insurance market who are giving policies which does not have these waiting periods. So these policies are pretty new, so they don't have a precedence in terms of claim settlements and other aspects. But obviously, these policies will be much costlier than the normal traditional policies. But there are options today when we look at policies, health insurance policies with 0 waiting periods. But under a conventional policy, you cannot do away the waiting period. Probably you can look at a reduction. If you're 25 years of age, probably a waiting period can go down to 2 years. But you cannot have a 0 waiting period unless you look at these new age policies which have a 0 waiting period under them.
So when you talk about new age policies, Amjad, what kind of policies do you actually mean in terms of features, in terms of coverage?
So these policies are like any other normal health policies offered by the insurtechs or new companies which have come up in the health insurance space. They cover the way other traditional policies also cover, but they have a 0 waiting period. Like everything is covered from day one, and obviously the cost of these policies would be at least 2.5, 3 times higher than a normal traditional policy. So, and the sum insured are not very large, since as I said, this is a new type of experiment which the insurance companies are coming up with 0 waiting periods. That's why they are taking these chances by putting in a smaller sum insured to see what kind of behavior we'll see. And also the prices have been jacked up. So they want to see these kind of policies, what kind of experience on claims they will develop over the period, and accordingly they can expand into it.
Harsh, my next question to you is, when we talk about waiting periods, it's usually health insurance policies that we're talking about, or this can extend to other type of policies or coverage also, like disease-specific policies where we see a lot of cancer policies coming. We have different type of ailments policies, critical illness is there, personal accident is there. Is there a waiting period clause also in these kind of policies?
Okay, let's break that down. If you look at a standard, because again, a critical illness policy has been predefined as to what kind of illnesses can be covered. That has been predefined by IRDA. What are the, wordings, etc. I don't think there can be any waiting period. I'm not sure. I would let, I think Amjad answer that question. I think the key is this. This is much like the golf handicaps, right? If you have people with different risk paying the same premium, then you're not being fair to the person who has a lower risk. And I think this entire waiting period is like a handicap, so that the person with a higher risk can still participate in the same pool as the person with a lower risk. So there can possibly be waiting periods conceptually. Whether they are allowed or not, I am not very sure in critical policies or disease specific policies like cancer. I don't think there is any restriction like that, but I'm not completely sure.
Sure, sure. Amjad, would you like to take it from where Harsh left?
So the waiting, as I said, as Harsh rightly mentioned, the waiting periods are basically a hygiene check, as he said, in terms of ensuring that people with a higher risk appetite are also placed in the same pool where healthier people are there. So that's the broad purview of having a waiting period. But what I was trying to tell you here is now, as we go ahead in India, the penetration is still low, although it has increased post pandemic. We see a lot of people understanding and wanting to have health insurance policy for themselves and their families, and waiting period was always an issue for people, right? Waiting period would not be an issue if you take a policy at 25, because the proximity of you getting hospitalized is far lesser than what it would be at 40. So a person who's taking a policy at 40, for him, a waiting period is a matter of concern, right? So those 2 years, 3 years waiting period, post which the policy will cover everything, is something which he got to plan against. He'll have to prepare a contingency fund that in case something happens before the waiting period, I need to have planned myself financially well for that. So now these new age insurance companies have started policies. As I said, they're experimenting. They have lower sum insured. They are costlier than the conservative normal policies on the health space. But they are coming up with policies with zero waiting period just to see how this trend pans out. And the ideal customers they would want is the younger population there.
Exactly, exactly. So, by paying a slightly higher premium, if you're getting a no waiting period policy, that definitely makes sense. But then, Harsh, we are just not talking about health conditions over here. Even maternity cover gets activated after a certain amount of waiting period. Or do you think the modern policies are also trying to add the feature of no waiting period for maternity coverage?
Actually, it will not make sense from the uh, coverage for, if you have a common insurance policy and a common pool, and there will be lots of people who are not going to be, who are beyond the age of, say, maternity or benefiting from the coverage of maternity, effectively by covering maternity for only select people, again, as I said, that's a disadvantage for those who have no requirement for that disease to be covered. So typically, even where there is a lower waiting, you see, maternity is something that is the control is a lot in the hands of the insured person themselves. So because of that, I think a lower waiting period is more or less something where the claim is likely to be paid out. So please remember, the waiting period may be not very large, the premiums will be high, and there will always be a cap on the amount that you can claim. So nothing comes for free. So I think a lower waiting period on maternity will sort of even itself out in terms of what claim amount you can expect to get vis-a-vis the higher premium that you would pay on such a policy.
All right. So, Amjad, one very hypothetical question, or maybe it could be valid also. You're an expert, you would know better. What if you have a health condition, and for that you're given a waiting period for 2 years, and once you complete the 2 years, the insurance company just refuses to cover you for that kind of ailment? Is that possible? Does that happen? And if it happens, in what cases, under what circumstances?
So ideally, no. Once you have crossed the waiting period, the insurance company is liable to take care of claims, take care of all those claims post your completion of your waiting period. So, I'm saying, if you ask me is there a guarantee? So I think guarantee is a very strong word. So assurance is what I would like to put here. The moment you cross all the waiting periods on the pre-existing side, every single disease under that list will be covered by the insurance company. There's no way the insurance company can deny those claims.
All right, Harsh, now let's just wrap up this discussion, and I would like you to recommend new age health insurance policies to our viewers, if at all they have one, and what if they want new features, and especially the kind of features where there is no waiting period.
So my point is that health insurance is basically an insurance to cover for the unexpected event of hospitalization costs being incurred because of either disease or because of accident. any additional features that you might need, like per day of hospitalization, a certain amount being fixed, you getting an air cover if you fall sick in a area where hospitals are not available, then an air ambulance or something, anything extra that you take will obviously cost more in terms of premium. Not all of them may may be useful. I think the way you should look at is, if the only thing about the new age policies that you are looking at is dropping waiting periods, as an insurance company, I would be very suspicious. Why are you so worried about waiting period? If you know that you don't have that disease and very limited diseases have a waiting period, then why are you so worried about the waiting period? So I think the price increase that you will get in terms of premium, if you don't know that you have those diseases, will not be worth it. So do not select a new age policy simply because it has no waiting period. Having said that, there are many now new features that are coming out. The cashless is much better, etc. I think those are some of the features that you should definitely look at. I don't think waiting period should be the defining reason why you will or will not take a policy.
All right. Right. Amjad, same question to you. What will you answer?
So in today's times, as we have seen how the industry has matured, right from having four PSUs to India getting privatized, we have so many general insurance companies. In fact, today we have 6 to 7 standalone health insurance companies who do nothing but only health insurance. So choosing a right policy, I would not put a finger on an insurance company or a type of policy. Certain important things we got to look at as the markets have evolved and as our healthcare has changed over a period of last 10 years. You would know that medical inflation is at an all-time high. So your cost of hospitalization is increased post-pandemic as well. I don't need to compare 10 years back, but if I just go before the pandemic, the cost has doubled up, right? So that's the kind of impact which you have on your cost. So important things to look at while you buy a health insurance policy is, one is you have to look at the adequacy. Is your sum insured which you're selecting is adequate enough? That's important because it depends on your age, your lifestyle, and which city you belong to, because city would define your cost, right? If you go to a tier 1, tier 2 city compared to Bombay, the cost for the same disease management would be much lower. So these are the certain factors you're going to decide that what is your sum insured limit? Network of hospitals is more or less the same. So that is no defining factor. Yes, waiting period should not be the defining factor to choose a policy. And you got to look at certain add-ons like a critical illness rider, right? A cancer rider. All these policies are also there in the market. You got to look at a well-being rider as well. So these are the things which the new age standalone health insurance companies have come up. We got to focus on them in terms of what their offerings are, because these are very futuristic policies which they look at changing your overall health. So that's how we got to look at it. Adequacy is something which we should not ignore at all.
All right, I think that will be all. Thank you so much, Harsh and Amjad, for being on the show and explaining all nitty-gritties as far as waiting period in your insurance policies are concerned. Thank you so much. All right, on that note, we'll take a quick break, but then post that, let's talk about claim settlement for life insurance or a health insurance policy. What are the formalities? In what situation can your claim also get rejected? All of this and more after this break.